So listen, if you're a fan of Canucksploitation or CanCon movies like me of the 70s and 80s, one of three things is going to happen. It's going to star Nick Mancuso, it's going to star Kate Reid, or it's going to star Saul Rubinek to qualify as one of those two categories. In this movie, all three of these talented actors are in it. This is a very bizarre movie, and the plot itself is so freaky. Were it not for my tax dollars paying for it, I wouldn't believe it even occurred. It's called Debt Ship. Now, this 1980 horror film is directed by Alvin Rakoff and stars Richard Crenna, George Kennedy, Nick Mancuso, Sally Ann Hose, Kate Reid, Victoria Burgoyne, and Saul Rubinek in an early role. The screenplay by John Robbins was based on a story by Jack Hill and David P. Lewis. So you got George Kennedy of Earthquake fame and Airport fame. This was a British-Canadian co-production. The film was shot on a location in Dauphin Island, also in Alabama, Quebec City, and the Gulf of Mexico. Now that's quite divergent. It was director Radkoff's only horror film, and upon release received mixed negative reviews, but it's considered a cult classic. Now, a screenplay by John Robbins, the story by Jack Hill and David P. Lewis, edited by Mike Campbell, cinematography of René Vezier, music by Ivor Stanley. Production companies were Bloodstar Films and Bloodstar Productions. Distributed by Astral Media. Released March 1980 in Texas and Florida. And April 4th, 1980 in Edmonton, of all places. 91 minutes. And it did middling at the box office, 1.5 million. Now in this one, prickly Captain Ashland is leading his cruise ship on his final voyage, attended by his replacement Trevor Marshall, who has brought along his family. And in the middle of the night, following a routine Caribbean route, their radar detects a mysterious black freighter on a collision course that matches their heading, regardless of evasive maneuvers. Despite Ashland's best efforts, the ships collide, sinking the cruise ship and taking with it most of her crew and passengers. The next day, a handful of survivors, Marshall, his wife Margaret, their children Robin and Ben, a young officer named Nick and his love interest Lori, the ship's comic Jackie, and a passenger, Mrs. Morgan, are adrift on a large piece of wreckage. Ashland surfaces nearby and he's brought aboard, barely conscious. Later, the survivors come upon the black freighter, unaware it's the ship that attacked them. Finding a boarding ladder slung into the stern, they climb aboard, but not before the ladder plunges in the sea as the officer tries to climb it with the injured Ashland. When all are finally aboard, Jackie tries to rally the survivors with humor, but a cable seizes him by the ankle, and he's swung outboard by one of the ship's cranes, which lowers him into the water before cutting him loose to be swept astern and lost. Shocked, the survivors explore the corridors of the empty, echoing vessel, finding only cobwebs and 1930s memorabilia. Hatches open and close by themselves, and lights go on and off, while a swinging block knocks out Nick, who is exploring above deck. Meanwhile, the delirious Ashland hears a mysterious, disembodied voice speaking to him in German. The others finally set up in a dusky bunk room as they separate to retrieve supplies and the injured captain. Mrs. Morgan finds a gramophone and a movie projector that suddenly turns on by itself. While watching the film, 1936 Everything is Rhythm, and eating a piece of hard candy from one of the ship's cupboards, she begins decomposing and becomes grotesquely deformed. Terrified, she stumbles back to the bunk room, where a possessed Ashland strangles her. Now awake and apparently possessed by the ship's dead captain, Ashland dons a Kriegsmarine officer's uniform and announces that he's the captain. Marshall and Nick make a chilling discovery. The ship was once a Nazi prison ship, and the ghosts of his inmates and crew are still aboard. Upon visiting the chart room, they see that the map of the ship's course shows that it just travels round and round the Atlantic in huge circles. They both decide to escape, but they are thwarted when the ship's lifeboats lower into the sea by themselves and drift away. Despairing, the survivors try to get some rest, but are further taunted by Ashland, who now prowls the ship's passages. While the children stumble upon a radio room, which starts playing Horst Welles' Lied, Lori goes into shock when a shower of water turns to blood. Very effective scene. She's then tossed overboard by Ashland. Now, Marshall and Nick are attacked by the piercing whine of ship's electronics as the projector now begins showing old newsreel footage of Hitler. Nick lunges at Ashland, but instead plunges in the net holding skeleton remains, where Ashland drowns him. Ashland tells Marshall that the ship is possessed by the spirits of his long dead crew and hunts other boats in its path, destroying them and luring the survivors on board to kill them and feed on their blood. Always a good way to open a cruise. Marshall manages to stab a gloating Ashland, apparently killing him and stopping the ship. Searching below, Marshall finds a life raft in a freezer full of frozen bodies of downed RAF airmen and Soviet sailors. But as the children are jumping overboard, Margaret is captured by a resurrected Ashland and is trapped in a chain locker. Marshall is knocked out by Ashland, but awakens in time to find Margaret, who has escaped from the locker. Captain Ashland attempts to shoot the escaping Marshall family. Meanwhile, the spirits of the crew detected on their cruise liner begin to give chase, ignoring Ashland, who wants it to run down to Marshall's raft instead. Trying to retake control of the ship, Ashland storms in the engine room and shoots at the machinery in vain, but falls in the steering gear and is crushed to death. His screams of agony echo throughout the ship, joining those of his earlier victims. Above, the marshals rejoice as the freighter turns and sails away. After drifting for some time, they are spotted by a search helicopter and rescued. Now, the dead ship is shown afterwards, steaming along at full speed. It heads for another passenger ship, and the sounds of the collision are accompanied by the triumphant blasting of its horn. So, Richard Crenna played Trevor Marshall, George Kennedy as Captain Ashland, and in an ironic twist of fate, Nick Mancuso played Nick. Sally Ann Hose played Margaret Marshall, Kate Reed as Sylvia Morgan, Victor Bourgogne as Laurie, Jeffrey McKinney as Robin Marshall, Danny Higman as Ben Marshall, Saul Rubinek as Jackie in a short performance, Murray Crouchley as Parsons, and Auntie Sherwood as Seaman. Now, Dead Ship was released in 250 theaters in Wisconsin, Texas, and Florida on March 7, 1980, where it was distributed by Avco Embassy Pictures. Yes, the same one that supported the WHA and the car company and the banking company. It was released in Edmonton, where it was distributed by Astral Films. And again, the film was a box office disappointment. However, from a contemporary review, Stephen Jenkins reviewed the film in the Monthly Film Bulletin, stating that the film had a promising central idea. An ex-Nazi torture ship prowling the ocean in search of blood, a vampire ship, is interred a particularly pedestrian narrative. The review also critiqued the arbitrarily borrowing from the psycho shower bath sequence down to specific shots and camera angles, open the way for some overt sadistic voyeurism. Now, film review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reported an approval rating of 29% based on 7 reviews with a 4.2 rating average. TV Guide only gave it 1 star out of 5, calling the film so ludicrous it's quite funny. Jeremy Biltz from DVD Talk gave the film a positive review, writing, Dead Ship isn't a perfect film, but is an enjoyable one, especially for fans of the somewhat lower-tier horror efforts of the late 70s and early 80s. But in the words of one of the person who was distributing this movie, they basically said it's all there on the screen. Now, Dead Ship did well on beta and VHS back in the day because the poster, say like our good friend Robert Evans, if you can sell it through the poster, and the trailer for the movie is quite good actually. It looks very effective. But see, George Kennedy as a person losing his mind because of the ship is yet to be seen. Now, get this: when the crew of the ocean liner picks up the echo of the approaching ghost ship on the radar, the close-up of the ship's radar imagery is a reverse image video clip of the fog-covered Skull Island, taken from 1976 King Kong. Now, as the Dead Ship collides with the cruise liner, brief scenes of an explosion, a grand piano falling between decks, and the engine room flooding were cut in. These scenes were from a movie that came out 20 years before, The Last Voyage. Now, the footage showing the movement of the Dead Ship was a result of filming from a small boat moving around it. The crew shot for about an hour before the Dead Ship broke down. The rest of the required shots were achieved by faking movement, as a broken-down vessel was anchored and stationary. Now, when first looking in the bathroom, there's a pin-up photo on the wall, and everybody can recognize that as Betty Grable. Now, the blood used in the shower scene was not real, but the actors were told it was real for effect. The shower scene was shot in one take because it was too expensive to clean up and reshoot, typical Canadian movie. Now, of course, this was the final film appearance of Sally Ann Hose. And what about Sally Ann? Of course, her big performances, including Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby. But that was the first movie performance, but not the first last TV performance. So, ladies and gentlemen, but it's so weird because the trailer for the movie, like I said, is quite interesting. I would check it out. So this is the latest in our Can-Exploitation series. We're going to be doing more and more as we go along. But all I know, ladies and gentlemen, I watched the trailer as a young man back in the day, and like the words of the great Robert Evans, it's all on the screen. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you're doing here with our vintage movie reviews, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.